All right, we're back on a Wednesday morning, the Chase Thomas podcast with Matt Chernoff, old friend. Matt, did you know that we actually, quote unquote, worked together a decade ago now?
Is it that long ago? That just means we're getting old.
We're getting old, man. I'm 31, so I was doing the math where it was like, yeah, I was in college, undergrad, and I wasn't even a senior, so I had it. It's a decade, man.
Well, I'm 35 now, so that's there's the math works out.
Oh man, does it feel like you've been doing sports radio for as long as you have?
It doesn't. It's weird that you start adding up all the years and trying to come up with, because I was in a different place at another station, so that feels like a different lifetime. Then you come to this place and it feels like a different lifetime. And there are so many other kind of gigs along the way that you add it all up and you're like, yeah, it has been 20 couple of years at this point. It's kind of nuts.
It does. Have you thought about a number? Do you want to go 30? Do your kids have a preference? Does your wife have a preference on how long you do it?
Probably. Let's get them through college, and then we'll figure out where we are. But no, I love doing this. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Like, I know people who want to walk away and go sit on a beach, and while I love my vacation, I love this too much. Like, This is one of those things that I don't see myself fully giving up. Maybe I'm not doing it full time at some point later on, but like, this is too much fun. I mean, we talk about it being work, and it is work, but it's what we love to do. No, I have no, desire to walk away from this at some point. I don't have a countdown clock going on. I'd love to do it as long as I could.
Mm-hmm. Well, have you thought about doing a Brian Hoyt situation where you just you leave it up in the air and then you have this grand return and really, really just drive the knife into a lot of fans all around the state?
I like how you call it the Brian Hoyt situation. No, there's no, my life is never going to revolve around anything called the Brian Hoyt situation. No, I plan to, my career to go a little bit differently than his, all due respect. And I say this out of love, but his path I will not follow.
Yeah. I think that's a good rule of thumb for anyone who's thinking about which direction to go. Don't follow the Brian Hoyt path. I think that's always a good way to go. It is funny though, when I watch the show and things like that, I love that it's all on video. So when I'm working throughout the day, I can watch you guys and it's just easier. The video component is just a really cool thing. Do you notice it though, that
I forget about it?
Yeah.
I mean, it always fascinates me why people have an interest in watching radio. I mean, I sort of did it myself through the years, but I don't think about it. And that's the joy of where the cameras are, that I never even remember that it's on. And there's some good and bad to that, because you'll see some hand gestures from now and then and some facial expressions. But no, I don't even give it a thought until I'm reminded to mention something or promote something for the video stream that it's even there.
Yeah. It's also interesting. Like, one of the things I would tell folks, or I would wonder about folks, is like, it's clear that times change where Chuck is so much more laid back. Chuck now is a totally different human being. So when I watch him and I listen to him, he's completely different. Do you notice that? Or because you're with him every day, that man, he got in shape. He's out here. He's just more laid back. He's like, I don't know. It's just not the Chuck I remember from a decade ago. I feel like he's changed a lot. I think he's a mellow.
I mean, again, I think you'd have a better perspective because being away kind of gives you an idea about that. I mean, does age soften you and kind of, maybe it does. Happily married guy, that's a great gig. He gets to work with me every day. What else could you possibly want? That's the trifecta right there. So, but I
when people house sit for him, he's always considerate on that front for any reason.
I've heard those stories. Those have gone a certain way. No, but I mean, don't we all mellow at some point? Like, at some juncture of your career, you start realizing we're yelling over guys running around bases, or catching a ball before their foot touches the end zone line. Like, this stuff is not all that serious that it takes, you losing your mind every day for 4 hours on a radio.
Oh yeah. It's also extremely strange when you're living in a college town and you're walking around campus and you see a Tennessee basketball player like Zakai Ziegler, who I've seen multiple times this summer, and you make eye contact multiple times and you know that he's noticed you and you've noticed him a couple times and you're like, I'm not a fan. I can't do this. And I don't know what to say. I have nothing to say to you. And I'm not following. Huh?
You know what the beauty of that is? I think what you're realizing, even at 31, is small talk is dumb.
It's so dumb. There's no reason for us to talk. Yeah.
Because nobody wants to be involved in the small talk. You don't want to do it. You say hi to each other, you move on. And then the problem with small talk is the small talk very quickly shifts into big talk. Yeah. And once we've moved on from the small talk, now we've lost our ability to have small talk. So I'm a big fan of the nod, the kind of acknowledgement, and then we just keep going.
I did this weird hand thing. I don't know. It wasn't
No.
really a wave. It was
Yeah.
just it was not
No
good.
hand gesture, no hands, no waves, no like a head nod. I'm telling you, good head nod, little smile,
Mhm.
and then you just keep it
Yeah, I mean, Joe Milton was the one where I was like, "Oh, all I would say is, wow, you're a gigantic human being. Like, I can't believe you play
moving.
quarterback. Like,
Yeah.
you are a gigantic human being who's like 8 years younger than me. It's very strange." Well, Matt, there is some Atlanta stuff that I want to pick your brain on as we get started here on a Wednesday morning. The Braves, they come back, they win game 2 in this 3-game series with the Mets. It's now a game and a half back from the Mets. A lot of Mets games up on the docket for a lot of folks who are not aware. Like, this is not all that serious because they played each other still, what, 10 plus times over the
Like
next
12
month or
more
so.
times
Yeah,
after they play game 3. Yeah.
that's insane. So
It is.
there's still a lot of baseball between the Mets and the Braves still to be played. But what have your early thoughts from the series been thus far?
Well, I think it's interesting that we're 6 games in these 2 series that they played, and they're 3-3. I mean, the runs, I mean, the games have been close. I mean, a couple of things. I think as this goes along, we're going to have different looking teams. Like the Mets, the next time the Braves play them will be early August in New
Mm-hmm.
York. At that point, they will have added, I think, a bat or two because they seriously need to add a bat or two. There's also a chance they add an arm or two in their bullpen. So the team you're seeing right now that hasn't had Jeff McNeil
Mm-hmm.
and that hasn't had Starling Marte, I mean, even with those two, their offense is pretty putrid. But without them, you saw the struggle to score runs in both of the games. So, like the team you're seeing now compared to the team we see in August, and then as you said, when they play, they'll have 2 more series after that. I think it's going to be a very different looking team. My gut is, depending on what the Mets do, and I can change this seeing what they do at the deadline. I think the Braves are a better team, 1-26. I think if the Mets get DeGrom back, which I'll have my doubts until I see him on the mound, and I'll have my doubts till I see him the next time in his next turn, and I'll have my doubts every time he makes his spot in the rotation start. That being said, I just think the Braves have a better offense. I think the Braves have a better bullpen. I think the Braves, there is something too, I've said this many times about trust when it comes to teams. I said this a year ago, and the Braves were kind of in the same position. They weren't playing as well. But we were in August, and I looked at the Braves, the Phillies, and the Mets and said, who do I trust? And I don't trust the Phillies. I still have my doubts about the Mets, as improved as they are. And I trust the Braves more that, the season series, who knows? Maybe they split, the next 12 games, and it's, comes down to who beats the Nats up or who beats the Marlins. I just think the Braves are the better team and will win the division when it's all done.
And that's all cool. My whole thing is that, like, when people get wrapped up in this, it's like they're both gonna be in the playoffs. Like, it's all about matchups and who gets the Dodgers early on, and
Could
who,
be.
I mean, where things go, where you want the Brewers, I'm sure, for a lot of fans. But I mean, I think these are 2 playoff teams. I think at this point, it's pretty certain that the Mets and the Braves will both be in the playoffs. It's just where the seeding will be. And like the Phillies, like, they're still in a really good position to make the playoffs. So there could be 3 teams from the NL East making it. And, then it's just like we saw last year. No one saw Jorge Soler and Eddie Rosario and up and
No.
down the list. Like, I
Right.
think,
It's who's
like you
hot,
said,
but I guess the one caveat to this one is, and I'm with you that they're both going to be in. I would much rather be in that position where you sit that first round out. I could set my pitching up. If I'm whoever loses the East is going to be really good and might do it with 90 some odd wins. But think about having, in the Braves case, if you play that first new round of the playoffs in that best of 3, that you're going to set up, if you can set up with Fried, and then whatever order they decide to go with a Morton or Strider or Ian or whatever they decide to do, or Kyle. But now you're setting up for that second series, and let's say you had to go to New York or LA, and they're sitting back with that 4 days off setting their rotation. I think that's a very big deal. In fact, you can make an argument that what caught the Dodgers last year is they were pushed so hard by the Giants that it completely messed up their rotation. Dave Roberts completely messed it up himself, and by the time they got to the Braves, they weren't the same team combined with their injuries. So I'm with you, they'll both get in, but there is some legitimate advantage to getting that division, that first or second seed.
Interesting. Well, how do you think it goes tonight? This is your opportunity to be clairvoyant, Matt Chernoff. Because we'll go up after the game. Do you think they win the series?
I mean, I would bet the way Charlie Morton's going against this lineup. Again, the Met lineup, they have such issues scoring runs. So if Morton, who's now gone 7 innings in 4 of his last 5, if he pitches that way, it's probably another low-scoring game. But again, I would think the Braves would have an advantage in the game. Unless you help them by walking guys right now, this lineup, like they're playing guys that frankly need a catcher. Last night, the kid that hit behind the plate. I mean, they are a team. Like Nimmo can scare you a little bit. Alonso can always hit a long ball. Lindor can do some stuff. Outside of that, you look at that lineup and you're like, I don't know where I'm going. Like that, I'm scared that I can't go get out. So if it's in a 1-game vacuum, I would think the Braves are more than play today.
It is kind of wild. I mean, they're deep, and the Braves don't really have any holes, but they also have been really fortunate on the injury luck part of all of this. Is a lot of guys are healthy, and a lot of guys are healthy this summer in an important time. So fingers crossed on that that front. Outside of Albies, that keeps going. But I'm curious to get your perspective. What do you think the Braves are up to with the number 35 pick? What do you think they do with that? Do you think they have their sights set on like a Kumar Rocker? Do you think it's one of my guys up here in Knoxville? I don't know if you knew this or not, Matt, but Tennessee baseball is back, and they had a really, really good year. And a lot of people had some thoughts. Buck Blue, no hard feelings, really went after the Tennessee baseball team, and really enjoyed them going down a few weeks ago, but I guess a month ago now against Notre Dame. But Blade Tidwell, really good arm. He's an option there potentially. But do you think the Braves made that move because they have some sort of internal understanding that someone they really like is going to fall a little bit, and that would be like a Kumar, maybe it's a Blade, maybe it's a Ben Joyce from here? Do you think they have someone already in mind for number 35 to move on from Waters and Hoffman?
I would guess there's a group of guys. At 35 you're guessing a little bit, but I'm sure they have a group of players. I would look at this more sort of as a philosophical kind of a shift right now. Like Drew Waters was at this point regressing. He was blocked by Michael Harris. I think the Braves realized the value had dropped so much in Waters. So to get a chance to move him, two other prospects, and frankly, C.J. Alexander was a 26-year-old who was still in Double-A, so that wasn't going to fly. He's playing third base. The other kid, Hoffman, they actually kind of like, but low-level arm, so that could still play out. To move that to now couple pick 20 with pick 35, and they get $10 million in their bonus pool to kind of spread around. I think one thing we've seen with Dana Brown since he took over the scouting department working with Alex is they are in this window where right now they're championship good. They're much more willing to move these picks. So if you ask me what they do at 35, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But what I think is interesting is, like if you go back, Dana Brown's been running the draft since 2019. They've already moved half their draft picks from 2019 either to the majors or in trades. You saw that last year at the deadline and part of the Matt Olson deal. Mm-hmm. They have two guys already from the 2020 draft in Spencer Strider and Bryce Elder who have already been up here, and a couple of guys who were traded as well. So I don't know specifically what they do at 35, but I think we've seen a philosophical change that we're in this window where those assets, we'd love to develop them and make them the next Michael Harris or Spencer Strider, but that could be a pick we turn around and trade in a year with the player if it turns into something we can help the major league team with now. So again, I wouldn't guess at what they're going to do with it, but there's enough value there. Last time they made a deal like this, they picked up the 41st pick, which was Austin Riley eventually back in 2015. So again, to get sort of that lucky would be asking a lot, but it gives you the opportunity.
Hey, and you can't go wrong taking a Tennessee guy at that spot if that's what you want to do.
I've heard that.
People forget. Who's been the biggest surprise, though, for the Braves this year? Before the year, when you're doing your preview and you were thinking about positions and you were thinking about how things were going to go, who has been the biggest where you're like, I did not see this coming? It could be good, it could be bad.
The obvious would be Harris. Like Michael Harris wasn't on the radar to be in the bigs this quickly. He was on the radar in the organization. He was the number one prospect. But think about what Michael Harris has done, Chase. Like offensively, it's been a huge surprise. But the way he settled everything in the outfield for a couple of different reasons, right? He becomes your center fielder that, like, they're talking Gold Glove for a guy who came up in the end of May. That's how good he's been when you start looking at the defensive run saved and some of the other analytics. But it also moved Adam Duvall out of that spot. And Adam, I thought, to his credit, did a good enough job. He's not a center fielder. So you move him to left field. I don't think it's coincidence his offense picked up a little bit from there. It also allowed you to get Ozuna the hell off the field as much as possible to where he was supposed to be DHing. So I think that settled a lot of that stuff. And by putting Harris in the bottom of the order, I saw the number the other day that the Braves run production 1, 2, 3 in the order, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9 is essentially the same. I think that's a lot to do with him settling at the bottom of the order. Dansby was sitting down there before, but I don't think anybody, Spencer's been a really good surprise, right? There's no doubt. But by just like a nose, I would say Harris, because all the things he's brought to a team at 21, the youngest player in the majors that nobody would have expected this quick.
Yeah, he did not take in at bat in AAA in Gwinnett. Right. Like, he just makes that jump. It's wild, and it's just one of those things where you're like, we don't know what we're doing. We don't know how any of these things are going to go. Christian Pache may never figure it out, and he was Andrew Jones 2.0, and then Michael Harris just skips AAA, and he's just ready to go right out of the gate. You just don't know. What we also don't know is the Hawks and whether or not they are done this summer, and whether or not John Collins is just going to be welcomed back with open arms. The Atlanta Sports Guys, we've been talking about that for weeks and just getting our different perspectives on it. Where, I mean, that's the smart play, because I've always insisted that no matter what you do with John Collins, if you do move him, you're losing the trade. There's no way to make the Hawks better in 2022 by giving up, like, unless Harrison Barnes is the one guy who you can get for John Collins, where it's like, yeah, that's probably going to be fine. If that guy is not available, generally speaking, you're going to get a future asset. You're going to get a pick. You're going to get something, and then you're going to hurt this roster because you're going to have to slide somebody into that 4 spot who's not ready. You're going to try to go big with Onyeka and Clint Capella maybe. That's probably not going to go great. Collins actually needs to be on this roster, but it's also been like you've had him in trade rumors for so long, and you've kind of made it clear to John Collins that this is not like you're not a part of this long-term core, which is a shame because he's a huge draft win. And if you look around where he was picked, everyone's gone. Everyone's on another team. They're out of the NBA, and he is a huge win. He's just done everything they've asked him to do, get better each and every year. And that's just the biggest wild card is like, how do you bring him back into the fold, especially when you add in another high usage guy like DeJounte Murray, where this team is entirely built on their 2 guards and their wings, who like they are going to pay DeAndre Hunter, it looks like, a lot of money to be hopefully they're Andrew Wiggins and they still believe in where DeAndre Hunter's going. And you have Jalen Johnson, you have a bunch of other wings in there. You brought in Mo Harkless, you bring in Justin Holiday. And then the shots just aren't going to be there for John. Like the offensive usage is not going to be there. So they can't tell him, hey, we bring you back. Here's this opportunity. We're going to feature you more. There's not. Like he's going to be featured less. And if you're John Collins, you're like, what the hell? What do you, I understand completely why John Collins would be super frustrated, but I also just don't think Travis Schlenk can move him. Is that kind of where you're at?
Well, I think a couple of things. It's been very weird to me that for the last 2.5 years, anytime a Hawks trade rumor comes up, John Collins has been involved, because I'm with you that I think John does a lot of things, right? John does a lot of stuff that probably is not going to get a bunch of attention. Here's the one thing that we've noticed. The day Clint Capella got here, John was willing to do less. His role offensively. Clint got the roller opportunity that John used to get. So he went from essentially 20 and 10 to drop down to 17 and 8. And those are just, just the basic numbers. But it's the other things that John, I think he's the best energy guy on the team. You can't ignore the fact that he shoots nearly 40% from 3. That corner 3 has become a huge asset. I think his defense, which at one point was a disaster, is now good enough. It's not great, but it's good enough. I would say it this way. Like, to me, there's a couple of layers with the Hawks right now. They're trying to walk 2 parallels. Like, the one parallel is we want to be good enough to surround trade to win a championship. But the second one is, but we also don't want to go into the luxury tax. And they won't say that, but I think that's pretty much understood at this point. To trade away Kevin Huerter essentially for less, I mean, Mo Harkless and Justin Holiday are just rotation pieces. And to get a draft pick maybe that could essentially turn into 2s, that was a money move, right? The Huerter move was a money move. The Collins move always felt like, and I'm with you, that if they were going to trade John, it was going to be in a package to try to get whatever that next star would look like. So John and then 2 other pieces would help to make a deal to get a star. When that didn't become available, and when Jeremy Grant ended up in Portland, and when Bagley ended up in Detroit, and like all the dance cards were starting to get filled, I think the Hawks realized, A, he's on a good contract. He can still play an important role. And to your point about usage, I don't know that necessarily matters as much, because they don't run a bunch of stuff for John, which I've always had a problem for. I think you could run a lot more for John. But I think you can get a lot of stuff in transition with those 2 guards and their passing ability. I think when the second unit's in, you mix him in more with DeJounte Murray and John Collins, because as much as you mentioned Jalen Johnson, I'll wait and see on Jalen. I hope for Jalen, but I'll wait and see. Right now, Jalen's your backup 4. I don't expect Mo Harkless to give me a ton in that position. So I think there's a lot of ways you could use John, both with Trey on the floor, Trey off the floor, with DeJounte Murray to get the most out of him. I don't see how you get better at this point trading away John, unless it just becomes another financial move. And that's all the Kevin Huerter deal was. And that kind of frustrates me, because you're telling everybody we want to be championship good, but we just gave away what we think is a really good player because we're about to embark on his 4-year, $65 million deal for 2 guys that come off the books next year.
it would send, like you said, that's a lot of mixed messaging where they're like, whoa, 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 look at this thing over here. We just brought in
Yep.
DeJounte Murray, but don't look at this thing where we moved Kevin Huerter and John Collins. Like,
Right.
it's one of those things where I agree. And they say that they are okay doing that with a winner, but it's also like, we'll see. So maybe they have to be good right out of the gate. Maybe that's a situation where they have to be at the top of the East right out of the gate, and they're a top
Well,
four
but
seed.
there's my fear though, right? Like if you look
Mm-hmm.
at this team right now, it's currently constructed. Let's say it's mostly finished.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're better than Miami. I don't
Mm-mm.
think they're better than Milwaukee. I don't think they're better than Boston. Doesn't mean you can't have a better record because regular season NBA is weird how some teams, either due to injuries or just resting guys, that could certainly be the case. My thing about the DeJounte Murray deal, like I love DeJounte Murray, the player. I think he's really good. I don't think he's a superstar. I think the Hawks gave up too much. I think they knew they were giving up too much, but they were willing because they wanted to go get a complimentary piece to Trey. But
Mm-hmm.
now they traded most of their draft assets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was so funny to see Hawks fans the day Kevin Durant announced he wants to be traded. They're like, okay, now we'll go get Kevin. And I said, guys, you're out of draft picks. And the day before, you just got done saying the draft picks don't matter, but they matter because they're assets. And the assets to get Kevin Durant, I'll use him for instance, or what we saw to get Rudy Gobert, or in Murray's case. It's
Yeah.
not just like in Murray's case, they cleared money with Gallinari. But in Rudy Gobert's case, it took a collection of players and 5 draft picks, right? And the
Yeah.
Hawks are now out of their draft capital. My only fear, unless they're willing to go heavily into the tax, and I'll believe it when I see it, is I don't know how they get better from here. Like, I think the Hawks will be better than they were last year. I think they have a chance to be pretty good. I like Murray, but my hope, Chase, was that with Trey and what they were going to surround him with, they were never going to accept just being better. Like, they were going to try to figure out how to get championship good, and I don't know the route now for them to take that next step into elite championship good unless Tony Ressler is willing to say, I'll go into the tax, screw revenue sharing money that I'll get. I'll pay, the double money, 2 for 1, just being in, and we'll do that. I don't know if he's willing to do that anytime soon. So their potential is to be really good. If they get great, it's going to be because they go into the tax. I don't know if they'll do it.
I don't even know if it's that. For me, I think it's Onyeka. Does he get a bigger opportunity? Because he is still someone who I think can get to that. Like, people, there is some Bam potential still with Onyeka and Kongwu. Like,
I've heard that. He's got to get a jump shot at some point. I mean,
well,
before we
that's what he
start
said.
doing,
He's working on it. Like, that's
I
something.
hope so. And I like Onyeka. I just think, like, I've heard 2 things: if Onyeka and if Hunter. Those are 2
Right.
big ifs. Those guys becoming like Onyeka was picked 6th, and he's the backup center at this point still.
Well, he's
So
kind of that's not really his fault though, because Capella and Trey are like this. And when I was telling folks, I was like, Clint's not moving. Like, you read his comments and you look at how Trey and Clint talk about each other.
Sure,
he has a no trade clause on this contract on his Hawks tenure as long as Trey Young is still his.
So then you ask the question of how can Onyeka really spread his wings playing
Right.
22 minutes or 20 minutes? And I like Okongwu and I like Hunter. I just wouldn't bank on those guys becoming, as you said, Andrew Wiggins and Bam Adebayo to take this team to the next level. I'd love to see it. I'll root like hell for it. I just wouldn't bank on it.
I wouldn't bank on it with Hunter. I still think Okongwu is going to get there. I am a big Okongwu guy, and he's shown flashes. And if he's that guy and he's that anchor that makes Clint expendable, where it's, I think, one of those things where Trey, and this is part of why I think they brought in DeJounte Murray, and this is why it's so fascinating with him, is when you go through different usage rates of who Trey's been around for to this point in his career, and people are like, well, Trey gobbles up a lot of usage. He gobbles up a lot of oxygen. How's this going to work with DeJounte? I think for him, part of it is that he has to respect you as a playmaker and as a basketball player to move off the ball. Like, he has to have some sort of understanding, like, you can handle it. And I think that's why Bogey is able to do that. So when people talk about it, I'm like, look at Bogey's usage. Bogey had that free reign where Trey respected Bogey and that he could lead the offense. He could bring it up. He was a really good Pujic guy, and he was just a really good shooter when he's healthy. He's had a bad knee, and that's about it. But when Bogey's healthy, he has swung playoff series. He has been a critical part of this organization, and he's a vet that Trey respects. Murray's the same way, where I think Trey will look at it in terms of like, you're an all-star, I'm an all-star. You obviously, I'm okay handing the reins over to you a little bit. And he looks at Clint where he's like, I know Clint's a great role man. I know how he worked with Harden. I trust Clint Capella on the floor to do what I need done. I don't think he's there with Onyeka yet, where Onyeka just kind of has to keep getting those reps in and those opportunities with Trey to kind of build that bond. But I don't know. I think Onyeka's upside just as a shooter, I still think he's going to get there. The defense being able to guard 1 through 5,
Sure.
that's just, it's
No,
so
I
big.
like the combo. Back up though to Murray though, because you brought up something I think that it's sort of being lost in this. Because I agree with you. We've seen Trey in small doses play up the ball, and it's really good, the numbers. To your point, I think he will trust Murray, so I'm not worried about that as much. I hope people aren't inflating DeJounte Murray to a point where they set their expectations to a level that they're only going to be disappointed because he's a good player. And the trade was made, and I heard you just got an all-star, and I don't mean to nitpick this. He was a replacement on the all-star team because 2 guys got hurt. That doesn't make his season any less. But he also got every opportunity in San Antonio to have the ball in his hands 90% of the time. You're talking about Trey and Murray were 2 of the highest pick and roll guys in the league, 2 of the highest, usage rate with the ball in their hands. This trade to me becomes how quickly DeJounte can play off the ball at a high level. Because Trey can do it more, and we agree. I think he'll do it more. But let's be clear. Trey's still going to have the ball in his hands at a minimum 70, 75% of the time. How does Murray, who's not a great jump shooter, fit into that? Because he's a great slash guy. He's a good finisher. He's good in open space. Like, that to me, because I think defenses are going to let him sit on the wing and say beat us from 3 because he hasn't proven he can shoot well enough. How Murray handles those opportunities when he's not going to be on the ball, which is going to be a lot, to me tells me how this trade is going to go.
Yeah, and hey, he's going to get a lot of better looks. Like, he had never played with someone like we were talking about how he plays with Trey, where in San Antonio, it's just you're running with Lonnie Walker, you're running with just a lot of dudes who defenses don't respect. Keldon Johnson was a really good player for them, but by and large, Josh Primo being 19, like it was just a lot of youth, and DeJounte Murray was asked to do a lot on a really young, just they just did not have the talent that they needed to be who they were for years and years earlier with Greg Popovich. But I'm not as concerned with that one. I think they'll figure it out, or I think it'll be one of those harsh realities for Hawks fans when it comes to Trey, where if Trey is frustrated and Trey is like, I'm not playing off the ball like this, I'm not doing this, like there is a potential for a disaster here where they say it's like one of those things where you get 2 all-stars in a room and they're like, oh, we are so excited. We respect each other's game. We're going to make this work. We're going to be a 2-headed monster. It's all fun in the summer, but if it's game 13 and the Hawks are like 6-7 or whatever, and it's a problem, they have not been able to figure this out, that's going to spill over, and Trey's going to win that power struggle, and it's going to be one of those weird things where this is our guy, and like you have to sit Trey down. It's like, we have to make this work. Like you said, the draft capital is gone. Like this is it. Like this is your prime guy. This is your prime running mate. You guys have to make this work. And it's going to be
to your point, though, if they get out of the gate slow, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, there's going to be some getting to know you in this. It's going to be clunky. So if they started 6-7 or they're not on the same page, I would expect that more than I would expect them to be like in sync right away, because this is going to be a culture shock for both of these guys.
Yeah.
I think the good news about Murray, 2 things. He's a fantastic defensive player, which we know matters playing next to Trey, to have a guy who's 6'4" with this wingspan who can, he was number 1 in the league in steals, gets in passing lanes. So that's a big deal with Capella. And my hope is DeAndre's been good defensively at times, but he also hasn't lived up to the billing that he's going to be our guy who can guard 4 spots, right? And shut everybody down. And that necessarily hadn't been the case. But if Hunter is what we think he is defensively combined with Murray and Capella, you get better initially that way. But let's say it doesn't work. It doesn't fit. It doesn't work. Because Murray's only got 2 years, and they would take a full year to at least determine that, his contract is so movable. Like, that's another asset down the line. So I don't worry about that, but I don't disregard your point that who knows, those guys might not fit. I'm more prone to believe, because like to your point, I think Trey will trust Murray's playmaking, that his off-the-ball stuff will get better. Mm-hmm. The funny thing is everybody's like, well, I want Trey to be Steph off the ball. Nobody in the history of the game has been Steph off the ball the way he runs and moves off screens. But you just need Trey to do it a little bit more, because as much as Trey will get Murray easy stuff, Murray should get Trey easy stuff with open looks and just opportunities because of his playmaking. That there's a ton of upside, and I like all those opportunities. And if Murray can take his game to another level, well, now all of a sudden they are a top 3 potential in the East. But these are all ifs that we don't know about right now.
Well, and I think the last thing on the Hawks is just a lot of this is going to come down to Nate. Right? Like Nate's going to have to stagnate the right way. He's going to have to be a lineup assassin. He's going to have to be locked in on how to move these guys around, because we talked about Onyeka, we talked about Collins, we talked about Bogey, we talked about Jalen Johnson. I mean, AJ Griffin, we'll see. But ultimately, he is going to be tasked with juggling, developing these important young guys, making sure Hunter and Onyeka take the next step, making sure that he plays Jalen Johnson at least a little bit, because he was
That'd be
just not
nice.
he just did not play.
Well,
Um,
that's a Nateism, right? Nate with his rookie stuff is a big deal, and that's another concern. Like I don't love the Nate fit with two sports cars in the backcourt. Nate
I
is
agree with
a
that.
he's always been tabbed as a defensive sort of guy, and they
Mhm.
walk it up and plotting kind of a thing. Creativity when it comes to both rotations and just drawing stuff up, and just like from a scheme standpoint, that's never been a Nate thing. That's why
Mm,
2 years ago when they had that great run, I think Nate brought calm, and I think
mm.
that mattered. But I think it was sort of overblown about Nate and schematics. So like from that standpoint, that worries me a little bit that he's going to use two sports cars and he's going to drive them like he's in the school zone.
That's the thing that people have to wonder. Like, I would not be surprised if Nate is not the guy this time next year if he's not
I
on
wouldn't
this
be
roster.
shocked.
I think
No. Yeah.
it'll be interesting. We'll end on this, Matt. So the Falcons, do you think it's better to start Desmond Ridder the whole way to see what you really have in Desmond Ridder before being in a position where, because I mean, CBS Sports had the Falcons had the worst roster going into next year. Do you just want to throw him out there, see what you have, and then really have a good understanding if you're in the top three, you can go Stroud, Bryce, or whatever? Or would you be careful with Des if you think that you have a chance at developing into a Dak Prescott type of guy? Like, what do you think they should do in that regard?
So let's look at it this way. Let's say CBS Sports, which I don't know that I necessarily agree they have the worst roster, but let's say they're right. So
Mm.
if you believe let's start Desmond with the worst roster in the league, what do you think that looks like?
That's probably not good.
Well, that's not good for him. It's not good for
Mm.
them. I also have I don't want to downplay anybody's hope when it comes to a young quarterback. The likelihood is Desmond Ridder is like 90% or 95% of any third round pick who's ever been taken at quarterback. That he gets a cup of coffee, he gets a look, but he's really not the guy. Doesn't mean
Mm.
he can't be the exception to the rule, as you mentioned. Dak was a fourth round pick, Russell was a third, but those are exceptions to the rule. When you start running down all the other third round picks who have come in the last 10 or 20 years, you're like, oh God, Mike Glennon, and you start coming up with these names. I would be very careful with Desmond Ridder. Like, the one thing I didn't like about the Falcons acquiring Mariota is I almost thought he was too good for what the plan should have been. Like Mariota
Mm.
could mess up and win you a game or two that could cost you sort of building through the draft and the next quarterback. But the deal with Mariota is he'll get hurt. Like Marcus
Right.
has always gotten hurt. He's never played 16. God knows won't play 17. So, I mean, Desmond could be thrown in week 2. My gut tells me if Mariota got hurt week 2, they would sign another veteran.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've got to be very cognizant that this is going to be a lot for Desmond Ridder. Like to expect him, maybe we get to week 11, right? And they're 3-8 and they're buried. And it's like, okay, what do we have to lose? But like we're saying on one hand, the roster stinks, play Desmond. Well, if the roster stinks and you're going to play a rookie, he's going to get killed. He's not going to make good decisions. It's going to look bad. And what evaluation are you really going to have, whether it's 5 games, 8 games, or 10 games, with a bad roster to know what he is? And that's where I think they're sort of stuck. I would put it to you this way, Chase. I don't think anything Desmond does, short of like just being Russell as a rookie, is going to change their perspective on getting a quarterback if they're in the top 3 next year or top 5.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a win because like he might have great chemistry with Pitts and Drake London right out of the gate. He might be the
Maybe.
offensive line might be better. Like Jalen Mayfield cannot be any worse than he was last year.
Is that where
Like
we are? That we're Jalen can't be worse, which is that's probably true, but that's what a bad bar.
that's I mean it for sure. And there is context to that where he was thrown into position that he had not played and was not ready to
Sure.
go, and he was
But okay, but there's a great stop
yeah.
right there. Like Jalen Mayfield. Everybody who looked at Jalen said they overdrafted him.
Mm-hmm.
Not supposed to play right away. Jalen got killed. Part
Yeah.
of it is, to your point, that he wasn't ready for it, but part was they're just not very good around him to cover up for some of the liabilities you're going to get out of a rookie. Now, that was on the offensive line. Imagine trying to be the quarterback as a rookie who, I mean, yes, we've seen a lot of young guys play. Like we just watched Trevor Lawrence stink it up in Jacksonville. The roster was bad. Coaching wasn't very good. And people are already labeling him this and that. I just think, again, I won't tell you to lower your expectations on Desmond. I'd say be realistic. And if he surprises you, feel great about it. I would lean towards he's going to look like most third-round picks. Year 1 and throughout his career, they're just kind of guys.
I wouldn't be surprised. I can't quit. Like he just a winner from then on out in Cincinnati. Dude, I would not be surprised. I don't think he's a Mike Glennon type, but I also, like you said, there's not many stories of like the Dak Prescotts and the Russell Wilsons. I'm excited for it. Like I think Desmond Ridder is going to be extremely interesting to watch, and I'm really excited for the Falcons. Have you found yourself? Are you already preparing?
We don't bring up with the Russell and the Dak thing, by the way. Look what they walked
Yeah,
into.
yeah, exactly.
Like
Great situations.
we never bring up with quarterbacks what they walk into. It's always, well, Jamarcus Russell was the bust, and Josh Rosen was the bust. Dak walks into a really good roster. Russell, now we didn't know it in 2012 with the Seahawks that they were like ready to go and built, but they walked into good stuff. I mean, most of these other quarterbacks, I mean, like again, I'll use Trevor. What was Trevor going to do with Jacksonville and that team? As good as he might be with that disastrous coaching, the dysfunction going on with the staff, and then a lack of talent. I don't know. I think fans a lot of times will blame the quarterback if it doesn't work. I would always tell you, look at the surroundings, and there's a better chance that, like, Mac Jones would have come here last year and looked lost with the Falcons. For the most part, they kind of babysat him in New England, and he looked fine. I just think the situation has a lot to do with the player more so than the player himself.
He also walked into Atlanta and put together one of the worst football games I've ever sat through in my entire life.
Still, the whole game, that is that 25-0, and yeah, it was a nightmare.
That game was one of the most boring football games I've ever sat through. That was horrific, folks. If you want to go back and watch the most boring...
No, don't tell them to do that.
No, Falcons-Pats last year. Oh, my God. I think that was a Thursday night game. Matt, what can the good folks look out for you this week? 2 to 6, 680 The Fan. You got you got your own podcast. You got Welcome to Atlanta. You got a lot of things going.
Got the Daily 10 as well, which every day at 10 a.m. That drop, well, depending on when the staff decides to put it up. But in theory, it goes up at 10 a.m. every day, just a 10-minute whip around of Atlanta, Georgia sports. Welcome to Atlanta Weekly, the radio show, and whatever else happens.
There you go. I'm looking forward to seeing whether or not Matt's clairvoyant picks are true 3 years from now on Welcome to Atlanta.
Love it, brother.